right, so today's episode is entitled All About the Garretts. The Garretts. My wonderfully quirky grandparents. They were this loud, fun-loving, crown-drinking, card-playing, cigarette-smoking couple that argued on a regular basis, constantly, consistently, almost daily. But they loved each other, and they loved us, especially my children. My children are spoiled rotten because of my grandparents. Now this episode is going to be quick because there's so much to share about them that I have to cut myself off, or I'll talk about them for hours. In addition to that, I have got to get myself out of here to go to work momentarily. So if you're watching this, you're seeing me put my jewelry on as I prepare to walk out the door. So my caregiving started with them not too long after I had my third child. So I have 3 children, and by the time my last one was about 3, I had separated from my first husband and I was working on the divorce. And we were all living in my grandparents' 2-flat that I eventually bought into. So we're living in the 2-flat. My kids are going between apartments. At one point, my mom lived in the basement unit. My kids are going between apartments. I'm trying to make sure that everything is taken care of because I am, and I don't know if I've said this already, I am the reliable one. I am the one that can take care of everything for everyone. I have the technological prowess. I don't know everything, but I knew enough. I knew more than they did. So they called on me to do certain things. I had the ability to research stuff. They didn't really know much about the internet or being on computers beyond just getting some basic work done. So I was the one that researched things for them. When they did not have a car, I was the one that would drive them around to run their errands, or I let them use my vehicle so that they could go run whatever errands they needed to run if I didn't have anything pressing going on. And at one point, I remember vividly having this conversation with them. And I don't quite recall what brought the conversation on, but I'm sure it was along the lines of caregiving. But I do recall me saying to them both as they sat there on their sofa in their den area, their TV room, that I was not a caregiver, and that what I would be able to do for them was find them one of the best facilities within Chicagoland that was not going to cost them an arm and a leg, or us, because I knew that I would probably have to financially kick in something, whether I could or not. But I would find the best facility for them that offered them all of the things that they needed. And I would make sure that they were well cared for. And I would visit them, the children and I would visit them on a regular basis. They thought that I was joking. But I had to make it clear to them that I wasn't a caregiver. Not that I didn't love them or care about them or their well-being, but I just didn't think I had the caregiver gene, that thing that makes you want to care for people every day. Outside of being a mother and a wife, I didn't think it extended beyond that for me. I knew how to take care of my children. I knew how to take care of my husband. I had a little bit of an inkling of how to take care of my mom. And I took care of my younger brother as if he were my child, because there's almost 6 years between us. So I knew how to do that. But as far as taking care of seniors, as far as making certain that they were well cared for, that their doctor visits were attended on time, every time, scheduled properly, that if they needed anything beyond the regular doctor's visits, such as extended care, I didn't know that I knew how to do that. I didn't think that that was a part of my DNA. But sure enough, it's what I ended up having to do. Now, mind you, I did try the care facility first. At one point in time, we were talking about them, and by this time I had moved out. I had married the second time and I had moved out, or I was in the process of moving out. Maybe I hadn't moved out quite yet, but I was in the process of moving out. And we talked about them moving into something that was much more manageable for them, and either I buy the building from them or they just sell the building to someone else. And we had gone to this well-known senior complex on the south side of Chicago, the near south side, meaning the South Loop was just starting the south side area. And there is this high-rise senior complex. And they had gone to check it out, and they didn't like the apartments. They thought the apartments just weren't up to date enough. So we looked at the townhomes, and they just didn't really, they thought there were too many stairs in the townhomes and they wouldn't be able to maneuver them. So they X'd out that facility, or that complex. Now, mind you, my grandmother had heart issues. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's several years prior to this. And it was progressing, but not to a degree where she wasn't able to function. That didn't happen until much later, of course. So, and my grandfather was continuously having health challenges. His heart, his blood pressure, they both were having issues with their eyes. My grandfather eventually went blind. Not totally, but near total. And he had stopped driving because he had gotten into a car accident in my car and hit a pedestrian. So by this point, he had stopped driving. And like I said, they X'd out that senior community. So then, as their health progressed, they stayed in the 2-flat, but as their health began to fail even more, their health issues progressed. And again, I was looking to move out because I had gotten married, and it just made sense to me to move out for my husband and I, my family, my little nucleus, immediate family, had a place to mesh with one another and gel with one another and get to know one another better. I thought that that could only happen outside of the home, outside of that building. And my grandfather didn't understand it. He didn't understand it before I got married because I told him that I was moving out. They didn't believe it. And then after I got married, they didn't understand it. And I had to just sit them down and say, look, I had a marriage that was born and died in this building. I refuse to have another one do the same. If this marriage deteriorates and falls apart, it won't be because I have all of this negative energy around me, because my grandparents were also very negative people. My grandfather more so than my grandmother. Always had something very negative to say. There was always, what did you do that for? Or you didn't do that right, or that doesn't look right, or that doesn't sound right, or why didn't you do this, or you could have done better. There was always that kind of thing around in the air, the energy, the atmosphere. It was heavy. And ironically enough, I'm married to a man that does the same thing. I just didn't realize it at that time. So anyway, I move out. And now their health, once again, is getting worse. And my grandmother's memory is getting worse. And they finally decide to go ahead and sell the building. But before they sell the building, I look into another place for them. One that has medical staff on call, one that has caregivers, nursing staff, and doctors, one that provides them with their own apartment. As a matter of fact, they would have had 2 apartments. Between the 2 of them and the benefits that they received, they qualified for 2 conjoining apartments. They would not have had to cook any meals, which was a concern because my grandmother had the tendency at this point to leave things on the stove and it would burn. So they wouldn't have had to cook any meals. They wouldn't have had to do any laundry because they would have had a caregiver, a homemaker come in to make sure that their laundry was done, their apartment was clean. They just would have had to do a little bit of a touch-up stuff. If they wanted to warm something up, a soup or whatever, they could do that in the microwave. They had a mini fridge, things of that nature. They would have been able to do that. Their meals were cooked for them and provided to them. They just would have had to come to the community dining hall and have dinner or whatever meal with everyone. And the reason that the staff did it that way is because they wanted the residents to, get to know one another, not feel isolated, because that's something that tends to happen when you're dealing with seniors in such a facility. They become isolated and alone because they didn't either have family or they did have family and the family just wasn't coming by to check on them. So I took them there, we took a tour, everything sounded right, the money was right. However, they opted not to do it because although the money was right, according to them, it was going to take too much of their money and they wouldn't be able to do some of the things that they were used to doing, such as playing the lottery. My grandparents were also very avid lottery players. They played daily and they played big. And this is one of the reasons why they had financial issues. That's a different topic. So they wouldn't have enough money to play the lottery. They also weren't going to be able to smoke on the premises. They would have to step outside to smoke. And that was a danger for my grandmother, who at this point was in full-blown Alzheimer's. She could recall some things, but not everything. So if she hit, my grandfather's concern was that if she'd stepped outside to smoke, she may not remember to come back in. She may forget that she now lives at that center and would try to find her way back to the old house, the 2-flat. Even if she had a caregiver with her, he was concerned that she would not recognize the caregiver, the homemaker, and say that the person was trying to harm them or harm her or kidnap her. So that was one of his concerns. It was a legitimate concern, but we tried and we tried and we tried to get him to understand that even if that were the case, they would do what they could to make certain that my grandmother was well handled. And while he said he would consider that, his other concern was the money. It would not leave them enough spending money. Not that they needed any, because again, everything would be provided for them. They would be able to see their regular doctor, which I drove them to on a regular basis. They would be able to go to their eye doctor, which I drove them to on a regular basis. They would be able to do all of the things that they wanted to do, with the exception of playing the lottery. Because I think when it all boiled down to it, it was going to leave them each like $100 a month after the rent and utilities and everything were paid out of their benefit checks. And my grandfather didn't think that was enough for them to play the lottery and buy their Pepsis and, buy cigarettes, because my grandmother, again, an avid smoker. He just didn't think that would be enough. So we turned that one down. And they went into a senior building that did not offer any of those amenities that they actually needed. So that meant that I had to get them a homemaker. And I did that So they would have someone to clean for them daily, cook for them daily, run quick errands for them if needed. If I couldn't do it or my mom couldn't do it, there would be someone there that could take care of that for them. And then at some point I wasn't working any longer, and I said, okay, fine, I'll take over that role. And I did, but I didn't do it fast enough. I was working a contract position, and we were dealing with a good friend of ours who was really sick. And on one of these occasions, the friend was in the hospital. It was in hospice, and we were going back and forth to visit with him. And my grandfather was in and out of the hospital. And on one of these occasions, he went into the hospital. The friend passed away, and within a day of my grandfather getting home out of the hospital, he passed away. So the friend was in hospice. He passed away. The day of his services, both my grandfather and my mom went into the hospital. My mom came out a few days later. My grandfather came out a week later. And within a day, no more than 2, and I don't even want to say a full 2, my grandfather passed away. So now that meant that I had to take care of all of his services, reach out to his children, make sure that everybody knew what was going on, and take care of my grandmother, who at this point is in full-blown Alzheimer's and still does not recognize 100% that her husband has passed away. And I have to figure out how I'm going to care for her. Between her apartment and the house that we were in, the husband going to work, there was a whole lot going on all at once, and I couldn't move her into the house that we were living in because the stairs were too dangerous for her. And then suddenly I lose my mom. My mom passes away. While we're trying to figure all of this stuff out, she passes away. So we find an apartment. We found another house to move into. But then that falls through because one, it's very much like the one that we're currently in. And then 2, the landlord decided that he didn't want us to rent from him anyway, because he couldn't get as much from us as he would have been able to get from a Section 8 tenant. Because we didn't have Section 8, we were paying out of our pockets. So we found a place to live. We moved my grandmother in with us. And it took a little while for that to happen because it took us a while to find somewhere else to live. So between myself, my oldest son, and my youngest, we were taking turns trying to be with her overnight. The children did it more than I did, being with her overnight so that she didn't wander the halls, because she had started wandering the halls looking for my grandfather. So we finally find a place to live. We move her in with us, and just like that, the Alzheimer's progresses full blown. So now she's trying to escape the apartment. Now she's trying to cook food that isn't there. Now she's using the restroom and garbage cans. Now she's having conversations with people that aren't there. I remember one time she had a 2-hour-long conversation with one of her sisters on the telephone while not being on the telephone. It was a full-blown conversation. But she was not on the phone. The sister she was talking to had already passed on. And the sister that she was waiting for to pick her up, according to her, had no notion of picking her up. She had regressed. She had gone back to being a young adult. And it got to a point where I was getting sick because I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't sleeping because she wasn't sleeping. My husband wasn't sleeping. I had gotten so sick, she ended up in the hospital, got her out of the hospital, had a conversation with her doctor, and her doctor says, now is the time to put her in a long-term care facility, palliative care, and we leave it at that. You've done the best that you can. You're going to end up dying trying to take care of her. And this is something that I have yet to mention. While all of this is happening, I am talking to her only surviving child. She had 2 children. I'm talking to her only surviving child about taking her in to his place, caring for her himself. And he told me no. So my grandmother ends up in a care facility, a nursing home. This was in 2016 that we did this. And she just declined more and more and more. And we moved to Texas in 2017. And in 2017, I also lost my paternal grandmother. And my maternal grandmother, the one that I cared for and had to put into the nursing home, she lived a little bit longer, but by 2018, she was gone. And I was so heartbroken because I tried my best to make it work, and it just didn't. I tried my best to make sure that she was cared for, and it just didn't happen. Not the way that I would have wanted it to happen. And I think about that, and I've had to come to terms with it, and I'm okay with it. I don't live with regret. I've also forgiven my uncle who refused to take her in, and he has forgiven me because he believed that I had mishandled his mother. And of course doesn't recall me asking him to take his mother in. But all of that, on top of everything else, is why I am in the midst of a caregiver's crash. Pardon me. And I'm trying to move past it. It's not the easiest. But I'm trying. Peace and blessings. Remember to walk in your purpose. And know that I appreciate you.